Whether or not you play video games does not determine whether you are a millennial. Whether or not you understand how technology works does not make you a millennial. What makes you a millennial is a marketer. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I am Trace, and today we're going to talk about generations and why they're important or why they're not important. It's actually more the latter. Trust me on this one. If you want to get more of my videos, you can subscribe here on my channel. You can also come find me on Twitter and Facebook. I'm easy to find. There's also a link in the description to my new Patreon. I'll talk more about that at the end. Let's kick into it today. I have been on Facebook a lot lately. I've been out there like probably many of you have, and occasionally I see something that really gets to me. And it all started, for me at least, with this Facebook story about the Zennial. A person who isn't a millennial but isn't in the Generation X, which is prior to millennial, right? Millennial is a word that I feel like a lot of us started hearing not too long ago, maybe a decade ago, and it just exploded. It was everywhere. All of a sudden, we were grouped together in this thing called millennial. What does that even mean? And where did it come from? And why is it that it matters? Does it? So today I want to talk a little bit about that. So before we can talk about Zennials, what you have to understand is how generations work. We define our societies and we define how things are changing usually by one generation to the next. The thing is, a generation isn't a real thing. If you take one thing away from this, it's that generations don't exist, except in our minds. The US Census Department doesn't sit down and say, okay, generation A starts here and generation B starts there. That's not how it works. What happens is a media person or a sociologist will get together and they will name a group of people that share some characteristics. The whole thing is a collection of history that makes sense for this group of people and defined their lives. The very first generation to get a name was not the baby boomers. There's a generation before them called the greatest generation. It's because they fought World War II, America's favorite war. We talk about it constantly. We love it. You know why? We helped Europe win. So we look great. What a name, right? Wouldn't it be great to be the greatest generation? So it's the greatest generation first. Then it goes into the baby boomers, then it goes into Generation X, then it goes into millennials, and then after that, we actually don't know yet. So let's run through all of these. The greatest generation, again, fought World War II, was named by Tom Brokaw. Tom Brokaw named it that because, come on, who doesn't want to tell everybody that the people who fought World War II were the greatest? So they named it the greatest generation, and they get to heap that praise upon them. Then they were called the baby boomers because post-World War II, there was a boom of babies. So far, makes perfect sense. After the baby boomer generation ends in the mid-60s, you get Generation X. And Generation X actually came from the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies. It's also really stupid if you think about it. Generation X, the idea behind that was they weren't the baby boomers and they weren't the greatest generation. They were doing something different. They were trying to be different. So let's call them Generation X because X is an unknown. And that's really a big part of this whole marketing scheme is there is a branding aspect to your generation. Generation X was considered the counterculture generation, even though they weren't really being counterculture, to borrow a line from Stranger Things. You're not being a counterculture to do the exact thing your parents did. The 1980s and 70s was not characterized by doing things that were counter to the culture. It was being consumerist and being apathetic, which isn't counter. After Generation X, they were struggling to figure out what to name the next generation. And eventually they came up with the term millennial, which was characterized by the early 80s until the early 2000s, a little larger generation than the previous ones. And it was about 1982 to 2004. I think millennial came about at just the right time. It became the biggest buzzword in baby boomer circles. And part of that is because the baby boomers got their name because it was a boom of babies post-war, right? The population exploded in the United States. And then Generation X was marked by a slightly smaller population. And now millennials copied that baby boomer model and they have this boost of population. So we have these two giant generations with one in the middle that's a lot smaller. Okay, so now that you understand a bit more about each specific generation, did you notice something there? The baby boomers were defined by the fact that there were so many, and Generation X was defined by the fact that they weren't doing what the generation before them was doing. So what are we defined by? But it seems to me, this small, teeny part of it, that we're more defined by the digital revolution than we are by what year happened to go by at the time. Okay, so let's bring it back to the beginning of this. Zennial. Why does that have to be a thing? This is why I said it's fake. It doesn't. There's no such thing as a millennial. There's no such thing as Gen X. We created them. They're marketing terms. They're trying to get you to click on stuff because you feel like an other within your own generation. And should you feel that way? Of course not. Most people don't describe the 20-year period of their life. You talk about what you grew up in, where your formative years were. If you were in 8th grade, then people who are 3 or 4 years older than you and 3 or 4 years younger than you share the same emotional experience and the same developmental part of your life that you're going to share when 9/11 happened, or when Kennedy was shot, or when Reagan was shot. Those kind of major events are going to change how you see your life. You're missing out on the other vocab word. Generation is 20 to 30 years. It would seem kind of dumb to not subdivide that into groups, right? A cohort is a collection of people who share an experience or characteristic over time. It's often applied as a method of defining a population for the purposes of research, which means it could be 20 years if you really wanted your cohort to be that big. But we're not talking about sociology alone. We're also talking about marketing. Cohort was a smaller subdivision of a generation. Cohorts and generations are ways to describe massive, giant groups of people and try and get them to all have shared cultural experiences. Okay, so let's come back here to Zennial. Zennial is a thing that I found in this article, and everyone was sharing it and saying, yeah, this is me. I'm not a millennial. Millennials are dumb. They love Snapchat, and I barely understand this Facebook thing I'm posting to in all caps. Zennial is not a microgeneration. What it is it's a way for us to feel more connected to our cohort, a smaller group of people within a generation, and you would be sitting right in the middle of your cohort. Cohort, in my mind, is a more powerful way to express cultural groups. So people who are 3 or 4 years older than you, people that are 3 or 4 years younger than you, would be within your cohort. They share more closely this music, this media, these books, popular things in your culture. You get that, right? And then you share along this whole group a generation of millennials. So I have 2 brothers. One is 3 years younger than me, one is 6 years younger than me. Meaning my middle brother is within my cohort. Ding. And my youngest brother isn't. So let me use another cohort example to say why that might matter. Pokemon came out in 1996. I was 14 years old. My youngest brother was 8, and my middle brother was 11. For me, I was just getting into high school. I was trying to be cool. Didn't really work out. My middle and youngest brother really got into this new card game, and I just didn't even see it. It passed me right by. The thing is, some people who are a little older than me and younger than me are going to have a different experience. I guarantee you, and I recognize that. If you're already commenting about how great Pokemon is and you're 10 years older than me, great. I'm not trying to say whether it's good or not. What I'm saying is, my middle brother was within my youngest brother's cohort. So the 2 of them were able to play together, whereas nobody I knew played. Does that mean that we're not in the same millennial generation? Of course it doesn't. But what it does mean is we don't have the same shared cultural experience. The reason I personally like the 6-year cohort is because I think it describes a lot of what the problem is with the generational system as we use it. Somebody who is in middle school at the time of 9/11 is not going to have the same experience as myself who is in college. For my final point, I just want to say a Zennial is not real. It's a person who has a cohort that shares some Gen X and some millennial. You're not a different generation. You're still part of the millennials. You still remember the same things that we remember, like the digital revolution and the creation of things like Facebook or the creation of things like Google. You know, we share that. We have that same cultural experience. What you also share is a subdivided group of that generation, and that's good. It's a cohort. That cohort is your more shared cultural experience. You can subdivide a generation however you want, but to say that there's a new one just because you don't like the youngest versions of the generation that you're in, that's not okay. That's not the way to go. Generations are broad. They can have differences of opinion and differences in culture. Whether or not you play video games does not determine whether you are a millennial. Whether or not you understand how technology works does not make you a millennial. What makes you a millennial is a marketer, is a sociologist, is a media group. So if you want to call yourself a Zennial, go for it. But recognize that you're not leaving the millennials behind because you dislike them. What you're doing is pretending you're not part of something that you're part of. I'm a millennial. Anyone born from 1982 to 2004 is also a millennial. I can't wait to see when we're the old ones and we're looking at 2 generations ahead of ourselves and what they're going to do, how they're going to destroy and take down all of the things that we built. It's going to be really neat. Thank you so much for watching my videos. I really appreciate it. Please take a second and subscribe. If you'd like to see more of these videos, you can come and help me out. Go join my Patreon. Any donation and no donations are accepted. Please don't feel obligated in any way. But if you do join, $3 a month will get you your name on my personal website, tracedominguez.com. You can donate a little more than that, and I'll send you a handwritten note. Thank you, those who have joined. It's really, really, really great. And even if you think about joining, I can't believe that I'm so lucky that I get to be able to do this with you. So again, thank you so much, and please subscribe for more videos. Let me know down in the comments what you think. Do you feel like a millennial? What decade should you have been born in? I always feel like I would have had a good time if I'd been born in the 1920s. I really like the music from that generation. Plus you get to see the 60s, but you'd been an adult, so I don't know, you wouldn't be that cool. I'm not cool now, but you know. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I'm Trace, and I'll see you next time.